Nightlife, issue of the day.
18 minutes to the latest ABC News. Who can forget Bob Hawke's promise in 1987 that by 1990 no Australian child would live in poverty? And as we all know, the promise couldn't be kept, and Bob Hawke later described making it as one of the big regrets of his prime ministership. But tonight I thought I'd ask you why it is that we have been so unsuccessful in lifting people out of poverty. Why does it seem to be something that politicians lack the will to make reality, especially when Australian kids continue to grow up poor? The Australian Council of Social Service this week released a report showing that about 12.8% of Australians, about 2.2 million, live below the internationally accepted poverty line, which is used to measure poverty in wealthy countries. But just last week, paradoxically, the Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report found that the median wealth of Australians is the highest in the world, and that the average wealth of Australians is the second highest in the world. I wonder if we think that suggests we can afford to perhaps lift some of these people out of their poverty, but lack the will to do so. Certainly the Chief Executive of ACOS, Dr. Cassandra Goldie, who's been on the show a number of times, has described our persistent problem with poverty as inexcusable. The ACOS report shows that the groups most at risk of poverty in Australia are the unemployed, kids, particularly those living in lone parent families, and others who rely on social security payments for the income. It particularly pointed to the level of the New Start allowance, which hasn't been increased in real terms since 1994, as being really a part of the problem. The study shows that 52% of people in households on New Start were living below the poverty line. Goldie said that the low level of New Start means that every time unemployment increases, so do numbers of people living in poverty. When it comes to kids living in poverty, 575,000 Australian children living below the poverty line. That's 17.3% of kids in Australia, and a long way from the no child will live in poverty by 1990. In fact, the numbers have barely shifted in the past quarter century. So is there a solution? The Fairfax economics editor Ross Gittins wrote today, the biggest single reason for poverty in this country is the fact that social benefit payments fall well below the line. Increase them, the logic says, and you decrease the number of people living in poverty. Most politicians and industry lobby groups agreeing that the New Start allowance, which is about $35 a day, would be incredibly difficult to live on. And even business groups have joined the call for the allowance to be increased, saying that it's actually preventable, this whole issue. And they feel that the New Start allowance is so small that it actually prevents a lot of people from getting back into work. Those on New Start say transport to job interviews or appropriate clothing to wear almost impossible to afford. But despite sympathetic noises from the Workplace Relations Minister Bill Shorten, who's described the payment as incredibly low, the government's given no signs it's actually prepared to increase the payments. ACOS says the New Start allowance is $74 a week below the poverty line. Interestingly, other social welfare payments have kept much better pace with wages growth, and as a consequence, people receiving those payments are less likely to live in poverty. The ACOS report found that the above-inflation increase in the age pension in 2009 has actually reduced the rate of poverty for people over 64. On the other hand, it says a bill which passed the Senate last week cutting payments to single parents once their young child turns 8 will lead to more people falling into the poverty trap once they shift to New Start allowance. And of course, this is likely to mean their kids will go with them. So what do you think about what we should do to fight poverty? Are there any votes to be had in lifting the rate of New Start allowance to bring it into line with some other social security payments, such as the age pension or the disability allowance? Are unemployed people doomed to poverty because of belief that keeping the New Start rate low will encourage them to look for work? Perhaps you believe that. certainly the stagnation in the rate of New Start since 1994 suggests that neither side of politics has a particular taste for increasing it. The government indicated that given its long list of financial priorities, including the National Disability Insurance Scheme, that any increase in New Start would be pretty hard to afford, despite the immediate impact that it'd have. It's, I guess, an embarrassment that such a rich country continues to have about 13% of our population living in poverty. Or is it impossible to avoid? Is it one of those things that you just really can't shift? And if you live below the poverty line, perhaps on New Start, or perhaps because of other circumstance, it's probably not likely to improve anytime soon. Poverty in Australia, would love to hear from you. Good evening, Eric. You say it's the poorest people breeding the most, and you believe in maybe free sterilisation.
Yeah, people on welfare, if they want to, not compulsory, they could get free sterilisations, abolish the baby bonus, because I noticed on that Four Corners thing, they seem to have so many children, it costs them so much money. To raise a child to 18 on average costs $500,000, so it's a poverty trap having so many children. And I think the world's overpopulated, Australia's overpopulated. With savings, if they abolish the baby bonus, the money they save could go to increasing the New Start, free university and TAFE for people on welfare, on unemployment benefits or pensioners, disability pensioners, single parent pensions. If they qualify, it wouldn't take too much to get them into TAFE to finish their high school and then to uni so they could get good jobs and have more unskilled jobs. To have more unskilled jobs that people would go into from welfare would have put tariffs up again, and stop so many cheap imports flooding this country, especially agricultural and farming produce, And
it's really difficult, Eric. It is a global economy. We see it every day. We used to think that we were down the bottom of the world and nobody noticed we were here, but we are now the 12th largest economy in the world.
Yeah, but there's no such thing as a fair and free playing field. If Malaysia puts 60% of tariff on on imports to their country on cars, which they do, we should put a 60% tariff on Malaysian cars coming here. If it's a 5% tariff with American cars, 5% tariff on American cars coming here, quid pro quo. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying, but I mean, we're a trading nation. We actually, that's largely why we try and encourage other countries not to have tariffs, and it's part of the problem for years and years and years with trying to get into the European market, because there was so much subsidy to a lot of those countries that they had really inefficient farms and they were just sort of propped up to the eyeballs by tax.
Well, they're still doing that.
Yeah.
And also, it's not compulsory or anything, but if a woman doesn't want a child, with people on welfare and that or low incomes could have free abortions and things like that,
Yeah. Well, at least, you have access to it here through the Medicare system. If you've got a reasonable reason, it can happen. Norman, you don't think we get rid of poverty? The government, you feel, has institutionalised it?
Yeah, absolutely, Tony. I think, look, I agree with that. A couple of the previous callers' comments about paying baby bonus. I don't think that's really helping things. But look, the thing that governments are about power and control. There's no altruists in politics, and what they're basically about is votes. Now, if they promise to hand out money, then people are always going to be interested in getting money for nothing. So I don't see Ross Giddens saying that you can solve poverty by increasing the handout.
The New Start, yeah.
Yeah, it's just nonsense, because the higher you make it, the more people are going to go on it. I mean, like if you said you're going to pay $100,000 on the dole, I mean, who's going to work?
No one.
That's right, mate. So
including myself. I'm off.
That's right. Well, I wouldn't either, mate. I wouldn't either. If I could get $100,000 from the government, I wouldn't be working. Now, let's just get a bit real. When you start handing money out, this is what Milton Friedman pointed out, the laws of supply and demand work very generally. What you get is you create a demand for poverty. So, I mean, look, I don't know. Some jobs, I can understand why some jobs that some people do these days are so bad that you'd be better off seeing home on the dole because the jobs are so unpleasant. But
a lot of people are saying, if you're on New Start, you can't really even afford to apply for jobs because it's just, you can't afford clothes, you can't afford to get to the jobs.
Well, look, I don't know what the solution is, but as soon as you start handing money out, I mean, see, from my point of view, Tony, as a low-income earner, the biggest impediment I see to my welfare is things like the award wage system, where government's effectively using standover tactics to force employers to pay higher wages to those workers who are fortunate enough to be in the industry that's the favoured industry, you know. But your lower-paid people, and like taxi drivers, for example, that's what I do. Mm-hmm. We get $10 an hour, no benefits now, and it can get a lot worse than $10 an hour if it's a quiet night. And yet, you know, you got these ward wage people earning $50 an hour there on Sunday Holden road signs. I mean, that's the thing that I object to. I mean, if like governments just aren't interested in income equality, they're interested in votes. And the biggest source, in my view, the biggest source today of income inequality and disparities of incomes are governments. You know, they pay, like you look at some of these public servants. I mean, some industries, they get paid huge amounts of money and they've got fantastic benefits, and they're just shuffling papers, you know. So the argument that governments, Ross Giddens, to my mind, is just naive to the point of senility, to be honest. I mean, I don't know where he's coming from, but governments aren't the solution. In my view, governments are the problem. And I think if you go back in history, like 50 years ago, I don't think we had such bad issues, and we didn't have such high rates of government. You know?
The only difficulty with getting rid of the award system is that unfortunately you see what you get in the United States, where you know, there's a lot of people on, you know, $2, $3 an hour and tips, and you know, I mean, you might like to say, well, that fosters, you know, free enterprise, and so therefore, you know, people are, you know, more innovative in the way they earn their money, and, you know, the service will be better, and so people will, you know, be compensated for that, and you know, that's what the American system does, but it also leaves a lot of people behind.
Yeah, but Tony, I don't know that that's true, because American industry is the same as us. They've got a lot of high-paid award wages, and see, the people who lose out are the ones who are in the non-unionised industry. Yeah. And so I don't think you can argue that the American system is any different than ours.
Well, Norman, it's just that according to the Americans, there's 40 million people who can't afford to go to the doctor.
Yeah, I know. Look, I'm not arguing about that. I'm just saying that the biggest impediment for me is the government. You know, they are the ones who create the biggest hardship for me, because the award wage people, they're the ones who are on the rorts, you know, and people like me who are not in the award wage system get the scraps, you know what I mean? And so the more the government interferes in the economy, the bigger the disparities, Tony. I'm convinced of that. I know you guys might find that.
Oh, look, I mean, everyone's entitled to their opinion on this, and it is a difficult one to balance. You know, you can give people handouts, and they can screw it up. You know, they can you know, either drink it or smoke it or whatever, and so it doesn't, you know, necessarily guarantee that if you get more money that you're going to do the right thing with it.
No, that's right.
But it's, you know, this persistent, you know, figure that we have, you know, where, you know, we're seen to be a very wealthy country, but there's still, you know, that lag of about 10 to 12% of the people who just, you know, can't get their head above water.
It's always going to be like that.
Could well be so. Tina, you want a word. You say politicians are more concerned with what's happening outside of the country than what's happening inside of the country.
Yes, Tony. They seem to be concerned, and as they speak to me, they sound arrogant, you know, and totally overwhelmed by what's going outside, what's going on there. But in Australia, I have noticed in school that children's toilets are very old, and they all need to be fixed, and all the schools are falling apart and old-fashioned. You just go in any school out of curiosity and have a look their bathroom toilets, how they are.
It's I guess the difficulty, you know, a lot of state governments are tight for cash. They've seen a lot of the regular incomes that they normally get. You know, I mean, you know, they can't tax people directly. What they do is, you know, they pick up scraps from things like, you know, fines and
exactly, and
lotteries and
you said tight for cash. I mean, come on, if we can throw money outside of this country, we're not tight for cash. We have enough money for everything, but that's why our politicians today, somehow their heads are turned out of Australia. And I don't know why. Maybe I'm not well informed.
Yeah, I think we see a responsibility because we are a wealthy country that we do look after third world economies, and we often try and curry favour, I guess, by providing assistance to countries like Indonesia, to our near north, and
exactly, and that's what I wanted to say anyway.
Good to hear from you, Tina. Thanks for that, Helen. You're saying you've been on New Start for 4 years.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, I'm 50. Excuse me.
Well, that's really young, Helen.
Oh, thank you. But look, I'm pretty proud of myself, actually, taking myself back to school this year. I'm 52 now, and I've gone back through, after having to go on New Start, going through a work provider.
Yes.
They've actually helped me go back into the TAFE system, and I've been devastated this year with what they've been doing to TAFE cuts, but the course that I'm doing this year is pretty guaranteed because it's one of the courses that are very needed and warranted. It's community services work. Loving it, but look, the person that, like 3 callers before you.
Yes, Eric.
Yeah, look, I really had my blood boiling because, okay, yeah, here I am at 50, I'm re-educating myself, and he can be just so naive and just put a label on people on New Start and think, yeah, we're just dull bludgers or anything else. There are a lot of people out there, similar to me, in the workforce that are just trying as hard as they can to reskill and do whatever possible they can to get back into the workforce.
Helen, how are you finding it on New Start? Is it a bit of a struggle to keep the head above water, or you're doing okay?
No, it's ridiculous because I'm 30 minutes away from even TAFE. I'm 40 minutes drive to where I have to do 200 hours of placement, which is I do for nothing. So just my petrol bill. So I'm driving 5 days every day of the week. It's probably costing me nearly $120 a week in fuel.
And then your day-to-day expenses,
Plus, I'm fortunate enough to, I'm still going through a divorce, but pretty much I've got this place, but now I've got the rates, I've got the water. The rates have gone up. Probably 30 or 40%.
Helen, unfortunately, I have to leave it there, but thank you for just giving us a snapshot at least. I think we understand the issues that you're facing at the moment. We're going to return after the latest ABC News. It's the issue of the day, and it's the Nightlife.
Issue of the day. Tony Delroy's Nightlife. Issue of the day.
We're talking tonight about the poverty trap, the 2.2 million people who live below the internationally accepted poverty line, which is used to measure poverty in this country. And the ironic situation with the Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report finding that median wealth of Australians is the highest in the world, and that the average wealth of Australians is the second highest. Yet we have a lot of people struggling just to make ends meet. David David, you say that we actually need to cut rents to help people live a little easier and stop the developers from monopolising the market.
Yeah, that's what the idea I had. I just thought that maybe have a multiple property tax. So if you own a lot of property, you have to pay some sort of tax.
Well, you do a little bit. There is a land tax that comes into play if you own more than a certain amount of property, and that most of the states have got that sort of thing as a I guess a disincentive to owning too much land. But that is already taxed in a way. Yeah.
If you owned 8 units or something, would you be paying the tax? Or?
Yeah, you'd be paying land tax on that.
Oh, they've already got it.
They have, yes. So there is, for those who have, very large parcels of land and very large parcels of real estate, you do cough up for that. But part of the issue is that a lot of the states have just stopped altogether building public housing, or have just forgotten about it for the last 5 to 10 years, and consequently, there's not a lot out there.
Yeah, they're building a little bit now and again, aren't they? Like they're doing Sydney, I think, or somewhere in the back of my mind, they're building a few public housing right in the city there somewhere or something.
Yeah, it's a little bit at the moment, and I think there is definitely a need. And the problem is that certain suburbs are just losing their service industry simply because people just can't afford to live there anymore.
Yeah,
you can't have your firemen and your nurses and your teachers living in the area simply because they just can't afford to live and pay for the real estate.
I don't know what they can do about that. If they could just, the real estate it's just too high. Like you said, I'm just repeating what you say. You can't live there. So I don't know how they could discourage that, reduce it.
Well, what a lot of the local councils are saying is, if you put up a block of units, what you do is you have to have, 10 units in the building that is, available for, reasonable rental. Yes, you can have, your 3-bedroom, 500 square metre apartments, but you also have to have some lower price ones in the building to allow, people to get in and either rent them or to buy them.
Seems like that's a good idea, and then you have it's a better community, and then because people are making lots of money, but then the same people are making lots of money all the time.
Yeah. Well, David, part of the problem, I don't know whether you saw that Four Corners program on Claymore about 3 weeks ago. The difficulty is you put everybody in the same suburb in a low income environment, and it's not always a great mix.
Yeah. You've got other sort of things happening when you get public housing. You've got a few other little things happening as well, I suppose.
Yeah, well, you got to respect the property for one thing. David, thanks very much for raising that issue. It's an important part of the equation. Affording housing is a very important issue. We're talking about poverty in Australia. Our West Australian listeners have rejoined us after the mid-evening bulletin. We all remember Bob Hawke promising in 1987 that no Australian child would live in poverty by 1990. That obviously is not the case. We're talking about the fact that New Start allowance, for example, hasn't moved in quite a while, and a lot of people on it are struggling to make ends meet. Mark, you say people should be taught a little more self-sustaining in order to prevent the poverty.
Absolutely. I think it needs to start back at school. I think the modern day Aussie has forgotten where food comes from. So if the shops close, people starve. If you start, I think I've been lucky enough to go along and do a course with a very positive bloke by the name of Murray Hallam. I don't know if you've heard of the name.
Mm-hmm. No, tell me.
Aquaponics and is the idea, which is the marriage of the aquaculture, hydroponics. I'm sure you've heard about it.
Yeah, well, it's just one of those things where you've got to rethink the ideas for the 21st century, and a lot of old jobs have disappeared. Because as a couple of people have pointed out, a lot of the manufacturing jobs that we used to have here in Australia have been exported to Southeast Asia and China, and we've got to reinvent ourselves. And service industry and creative food industries, they're really important for our future.
But I mean, so what I was sort of getting at is if you've got food on the table, it's sort of the two-part answer, and part of it is to back what you talked about earlier on this evening with the agriculture and stuff. this is certainly, I feel from what I've seen, and America are already sort of leading on it once again, as they sort of try to anyway. But there's positions available, but most importantly is people at home who are looking for work aren't having to drive off to buy their local produce. I mean, they can build sort of systems, and there's other sort of urban gardening, I guess, is feeding yourself and then being able to have more money to go and put towards, because you can't sort of blame the government for not being able to pay enough money, because it's like anything, the more you get, the more you'll take. So I'm a single father, full custodian, and she's 3, so I spend a lot of time with her, and it's given me a lot of time to think about these sort of ideas.
So in other words, you're trying to make yourself as sustainable as you possibly can, and by having a backyard garden, that sort of stuff, it helps you balance the budget.
Well, and I want to move on to potentially the idea of sort of, taking our dry sort of climate and, advertising that idea to, our Central Australians who all we need is a bit of rain, hold that water. You don't have to keep, spraying it with tens of thousands of litres. You're just topping up the evaporation.
Absolutely, mate. I will leave it there. The line's just a little bit wonky at the moment, but thanks very much for your thoughts. Linda, you say that there is very little money management problems for those in poverty. In other words, we should be providing financial training for those on the dole.
Absolutely. I mean, we need to go back to, the concept of household budgets and putting money aside, analysing. Because I work within the refugee community, they certainly know, they get taught, where the amount is to pay the bill. Right? They're all on New Start. But they don't necessarily know how to then look at the bill and look at what part is usage and what part is fixed, and then go around and actually work out where they can save some money in their house. Secondly, the idea of even things as simple as changing banks so that you use credit unions rather than banks, and understanding how to go to the local library, do your internet banking so you actually keep all your account fees to the absolute minimum.
Yeah. And it's very easy, Linda, to get into a debt trap as well, as we've seen. A lot of people for a lot of years saw their credit card statement and saw the minimum payment on the corner and thought, oh, that's all I have to contribute. And the only problem is no one tells you that, if you pay that minimum amount, it's going to cost you about, $10,000 in interest payments.
Absolutely. Can I then make a second point? Okay. Currently, with all of this, the CES, there were a lot of bad stories about, having the Commonwealth Employment Service, right? But the problem is now, with farming it out to a whole lot of service providers, it's a really hit or miss sort of thing. Even, ones that have worked through charities. I mean, I'm working with a lady that has been required to try and get a job for about 3 years. Okay, she even started but didn't complete her aged care course. Right. Earlier this year, I saw her in an ad, and I checked it out for her. It was on cleaning, right? And I actually got her into doing the 1 week course, where she did the course, but that was going to be 10 of the 19 units that she needed to do. Now the problem is, and I'm just illustrating this in terms of the complexities in the way that we've made all of these things silos, that it doesn't hang together, because she rang me up really upset because she said, I got my brother to work with me for the cleaning company. She's happy with the cleaning company, working with the cleaning company. She's got one of her friends working at the cleaning company. Then they compared rates, $19 an hour, which is actually above basic rate, which is great. But then she said, well, I'm supposed to have a Certificate 3. If I got Certificate 3, I'm supposed to get $22 an hour. Why aren't I getting $22 an hour? Now, because of her literacy skills, the certificate that she was given and the communication that said, when you get 3 months, you get stable employment, come back and we'll do the on-the-job certification to finish your Certificate 3. She didn't understand that.
Yeah. As we know, Linda, numeracy and literacy is a real issue, and we've spoken in the past about kids who've made it through to university who they still find can't do an essay.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I'm talking basics. I'm talking about the word partial completion.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about anything fancy. I'm talking about basic maths that has a quarterly bill and brings it back to what you have to put aside for a fortnightly payment ready for your bill.
Yeah, well, Paul Clitheroe is actually doing this also for school students. So they've got that financial foundation so that they're trying to bring it in at a school level so that, kids who are coming through the system will, pick up a few of those skills as well.
Yeah, but the point I'm trying to make is, right,
Yep.
is those kids, it'll go in one ear and out the other because they're not living it, unless they're actually in that situation with their parents at the moment, right?
Yep.
What I don't understand is, okay, once you've been unemployed for 6 months, there should be a much more serious case study, caseworkers. They're actually working much more. I mean, but it's got to be with dignity. Like, for example, the same family, right? I made a deal because the brother needs to learn how to drive manual. Or he needs to get his license. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So I made a deal. I said, you come and do some work in the garden with us. Okay. And I'll do the driving lessons because I'm actually a qualified driving instructor, right? So I said, look, we'll do a quid pro quo. Like we'll because that gives them credibility. Secondly, it means now I'm now a reference for him because we can say he's a good hard worker.
Yes.
So the point I'm trying to make, it's about how you integrate and how you keep this equation going, that you don't just hand out, that you equate it with that they've got to give back. So, like, for example, if you're going to give them some additional training, you go, right, look, we've got the additional training, but we need 5 hours for you to work on the community garden or something. Do you know what I mean? So that there's a...
Just get some runs on the board.
And some real value that sort of multiplies, because it's not just about a single transaction. It's about then there's a supervisor for the community job that can go, oh, I know Joe Blocks, he's a darn hard worker and he's always reliable. Where does that go? That goes on the reference. Then you actually get, serious help with showing them how to do resumes. You have to really work with them,
yes,
positively and supportively. And at the moment, we've got too many organisations that are so caught up in the system of justifying that they've actually had this amount of hours so that the government will dole out the money, that we're actually not looking at the value equation for it.
Great to hear from you, Linda. Thank you so much for your views. Scott, you actually had a weird moment. You were on New Start, and because of the global financial collapse, you got off it.
Yeah. You see, at the time, I only had a HR truck licence, and I needed to get a job to cope because I was on New Start because of health implications.
Yep.
And it was hard to get work to cope with that. And with the extra money, I actually upskilled myself. I did take a while before I was actually healthy again to actually take work on, but I had the licence. Now that's going back, what's that, 4.5 years? I'm actually working full time. I've been doing this for 3 years now. Love it. Health is great, and confidence is there. I probably would have only been lucky enough to have extra amount of money because I've got a large number of children at home, and so it's like safety in numbers. The old saying, by the dozen. Yeah.
And so you're saying that even though it's a situation with New Start where it's not overly generous, it is if you're positive with it, it can make a difference.
Yeah. Although the extra thing that helped me out was I had a lot of family assistance payments for my children as well, so I did borrow a bit from there. But just with that, at the time, the government added some between the kids and that, so that was a large cash flow that helped at the time. But no, the New Start was only bare bones. We learned how to live very frugal, so just the other day, my 12-year-old was trying to make a cake and there was no eggs, and she wanted to go off and grab some. We used alternatives. It's just the training in it and getting their mindset.
And it's difficult sometimes because there's a lot of peer pressure. The kids at school have got new shoes, they've got the latest games, that sort of stuff. So it's sometimes a bit of a battle to keep that sort of thing at bay. When you're on a limited income.
Oh yeah, and look, the schooling these days is totally different to when I went to school, where my mum could make my whole shirt together, or when I was at high school, it was just a plain white shirt and you sewed a badge on and that was it. I just learnt the other day my son needs to get a new shirt and it's going to be $70, and it's like, ouch, where's that going to come from?
Mate, the shirt I'm wearing at the moment's about a third of that.
Well, this is just a high school kid. And look, my 14-year-old, in 12 months, he's just gone from, 160 centimetres to 185 in 12 months. It's like, what the? Yeah, now I look up at my son now, but no, these kids are just growing.
Thank God you got a good job. Well done, Scott. Thanks for that. Matthew, you say it's easier to survive with the help of government than to get higher income and pay child support.
Yeah, I think that it's hard being a father paying child support. Most of the time, there's a lot of fathers out there that have just quit their jobs and gone on the dole because you just pay too much child support.
Matthew, I've got to say that a breakdown in marriage or a relationship is one of the big factors that puts you into the poverty trap. It's very devastating for a lot of people.
All that I think is if they put a cap, because I've worked in the mines and that, and it's just easier being on the dole. I think if they had a cap, say 15, 20 grand, it'll be feasible to go back to the mines.
So, in other words, you're saying that you could then provide a reasonable assistance to your partner and your child if you've got one, and yet still survive.
Yeah, well, I've got 3 children now and a wife, and it's just so hard, just trying to support them paying child support. So if I could go back to the mines tomorrow if there was a cap on it, because all the money goes to my previous partner and the child, which the child needs the money, but if there was a cap, it would be feasible to go back.
And understood, Matthew. Thank you for sharing that idea. George, you say poverty is actually a layered problem, and if the solution was easier to be found by now.
Yeah, Tony. Obviously, people have been trying over many, many years to solve the problem and met with mixed results. I thought it was rather unfortunate they named that suburb Claymore, by the way. It's a kind of explosive mine. I think it's...
it is too, yeah.
Predicting the problem. But, yeah...
I have to say that Four Corners report was very moving to me. I didn't realise that the issues were so big.
Yeah, no, I do occasionally travel out that way to Campbelltown and Penrith, and it is an eye-opener. I mean, there are some kind of nice, sort of new housing sort of project areas, but there are also the pockets of poverty, and there are some old housing commission areas in those areas, and the real problem is that these things are self-sustaining in terms of you've got generational poverty and disadvantage and lack of education. I mean, it kind of if you've got kind of less than adequate schools out there, less than adequate transport and not much to do. I mean, it's a recipe for, as I say, just prolonging this generational inequity, because these people, often the nutrition is poor because they can't afford decent food. So
and also you get cross-generational unemployment as well, and if your parents haven't worked, there's probably a pretty good chance that you're not on that path as well.
Yeah, there's no sort of positive role models. I mean, it's not just in your own family, it's usually most families around you, because they tend to cluster together because that's where the rents are cheapest or where the housing commission areas are. And as a result, you just see misery and depression and lack of hope around you, and you might remember, Tony, there was that infamous incident where one of the tabloid newspapers pointed out.
Oh, I know what you're going to say, yeah.
Yes, Mount Druitt. And you remember, and of course, you can imagine if you were a kid going to that school and you were told basically you were the lowest of the low. I mean, it's hard enough to get the self-esteem of kids in that area up, and then they cop that, and I don't know what kind of justification apart from the usual tabloid clamouring for, some kind of sensationalism. I mean, they're constantly fighting against that, and as you pointed out, I mean, Australia might have the highest median wealth in the world, but a lot of that is predicated on our very high property prices, and if there's any kind of property crash, that will definitely get affected. And this is why a lot of politicians are always going on about how average weekly wages are going up or yearly wages are going up. But really what you've got to look at is the median, because that's where most people are basically at. And in Australia, it's a long way below the average, because the average gets distorted upwards by all the people who are earning, big pay packets, and that sort of forces the average up, whereas the median, where most people are, is much lower than that.
I noticed that the income on the sort of highest level postcode now is 190,000 per person a year, which is obviously pretty solid.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, I mean, I don't want to sort of be on a campaign of bashing the rich, because it is a bit easy, but I probably will do it anyway, just because it's appropriate to the topic, in the sense that it's not only the fact that they're earning a lot of money, it's the fact that, and you mentioned Paul Clitheroe earlier, and I've reminded you of this before, he actually said on your program that once you get past a certain wage level or a level of income, taxation becomes optional, because there are many ways to get around it. You can form a business entity or a trust and so forth and get a disbursement or an income. And
we saw in America, I think Mitt Romney was paying essentially about 13% tax. So,
15%, and that's only on the last couple of years. I mean, and he hasn't released his stuff from before that. Most people think because he probably paid no tax, and he's willing to take the hit of, not willing to disclose it, just letting people surmise rather than having the truth be starkly revealed. And that's because, even on his current situation, he's basically paying the lowest rate of tax, because he's basically paying the capital gains tax, which is 15%, as opposed to the income taxes.
Well, I think just to underline the point that you make, Warren Buffett, who is one of the richest men in the world, said that he pays a lower tax rate than one of his employees.
Only secretary, See, basically, there are many other avenues. I mean, for example, if you go open a bank account, if you've got a large amount of money, you can negotiate with the bank to get a higher rate of interest than the average person would, because you can put a lot of money in there. You can actually get better discounts on your credit card if you've got a lot of money deposited with a bank. Same with a home loan. You can, in business, there are many rorts. I mean, there was the car leasing rort, where basically people were leasing cars rather than buying them, and they were getting a tax advantage out of that, because it was getting taken off their kind of gross wage as opposed to their after-tax wage. There was kind of low-interest loans for various executives. Many, as I said before, the use of trusts and businesses, where basically you can pay yourself a nice income from the business, and the business itself can run at a loss. Especially if you're so another business is profitable, you can lower your effective company tax rate by playing off one business against another, etc. I mean, there's many. You can go into bottom of the harbour schemes. There's millions of them, Tony. But the point I'm trying to make is, if you're wealthy enough and you've got access to good accountants and good tax lawyers, etc., you can end up paying a lot less revenue to the government than somebody who's on a low wage, who can't get out of, who's in a pay as you earn.
Well, we just had an SMS comment come up on the screen saying it's simple as getting your truck licence. I'm on more than 100,000 a year.
Yeah, exactly right. And as you pointed out, Tony, the unfortunate thing is the further out you have to live, because that's where the rents are cheapest, that's where the transport options are poorest. I mean, in Sydney, for example, the cheap public buses are in the wealthiest areas, the eastern suburbs and the lower North Shore and the inner west. Once you get out into the far western suburbs, if you're lucky, you get a private bus service, which is far less reliable, far less punctual, much more expensive usually, and you're usually getting the second-hand buses that have been offloaded by the government because they're starting to run down, and the private bus companies buy them up cheap. And also the railway lines are much more sparse because in Sydney it's a radial arc system, and the further out you get, the spokes of the arc get further and further apart. So as a result, you if you want to get into the city or somewhere where there's a high-paying jobs, you have to spend a lot of time and more money. So
I've got to say, you've taken a hit on the SMS. It says, "Got to love this bloke. Bag all the people actually paying tax to support those on the dole."
Well, the point I'm trying to make is, Tony, above a certain level, they aren't paying as much tax as they should be. That's the point. Whereas the PAYE earners at the bottom are paying it whether they like it or not. Yeah. So I know they might not appreciate the comment. I'm not saying everybody does that, but I'm just saying they have the option of doing it. And as Kerry Packer once said, you don't pay. You
don't pay 1 cent more than you actually have to. Thanks, George. For those interested in that Sarah Ferguson report that I've been talking about a couple of times tonight, this was essentially on the Sydney suburb of Claymore, and it's kids over and multiple generations of people living in the suburb, and it's a Four Corners program from about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it would be available on iView still, or if you go to the Four Corners website, you'd be able to see that in case you missed it. It's worth a look because it brings you up short, I think. Arthur, you say those on the work for the dole are lazy.
Exactly, Tony. I've been working since I was 10-year-old. I'm nearly 80 now. I'm still working. I do a lot of voluntary work at a local race club.
Yes.
And I had about 13 or 14 men on a job one day working for the dole supervising, and I didn't get paid. There's not one of them you could have took to a private job.
Yes.
Worse than that, they've all got to go home for lunch, and they've all got nice cars. I'm the only one there with an old one, I think.
But I mean, you're saying that the scheme itself doesn't work. They're taking advantage.
Well, for sure, it's certain. You get them, and they all go home for lunch. Like even bloody businessmen can't do that. They go home for lunch and they come back, and after lunch they're spewing all over the job. They're crook. You got to lay them down, and you got to feather bed them. But what people forget with these people, I had one bloke, and this is, as I said, I started at 10 because the old man wouldn't work. He was the best French polisher in Sydney. He wouldn't work unless he needed money to punt with. The only time we had a bit of relief was in the Depression when Jack Lang shanghaied him up to Kyogle compulsorily. Either go to Kyogle or you don't get your 4 and 8 pence a week food coupon. And he had to go. He had no choice.
So the global financial collapse helped you as well.
In the war years, it was great because the manpower grabbed hold of him, and he was taken out to a spring company because when he done his indentures in Glasgow, he had a hard life as a boy, but there was no need to take it out on us.
Yeah. So he was your bad example.
Well, no, look, I can understand. I feel terribly sorry for children living in poverty. Don't worry about that. I've been there.
Sure.
I can remember being sent home from school. I went to the filth of the bloody Catholic education system they sent me to, and I was getting up at 4:30 in the morning to deliver papers and had to pay my own fees because the old man wasn't going to pay them even though he sent me to the school. Mother went to work at Hardy Rubbers down in Paddo. We lived in Paddington, and it was a tough old period of time. I wasn't the only one doing it. I'd make no mistake about that.
Absolutely. It's a bit fashionable now, but it wasn't then.
That's not fashionable, and you didn't know you were living in poverty till they come and told you.
Well, my father sort of went through exactly what you're talking about. He was born in 1922, and he said to me, look, I was 8 years of age when the Depression hit, and he said, we just started to get over the Depression and the Second World War happened.
Yeah, well, that was, like the first time I'd seen hot water, and this is true, I got run over by a tram at the Five Ways in the 40s selling papers. I was in hospital 11 months out at Hopewood House in Darling Point, which is now a block of units. Of course, they belonged to the Horden family, Hopewood House and Libya's house and all those houses in Thornton Avenue.
Right.
Well, it was the old private hospital at that stage, and by the time I got back on my feet, I was pretty severely injured at the time, and By the time I got back and I was up and about and I turned the tap on and hot bloody water come out, I got the shock of my life.
Eureka!
Yeah, well, we used to have to boil the copper and put the water in it. But see, the old man, he didn't care, and poor mother, when she paid the rent, he took the rest to punt with, you know. And unless you live through that, I feel terribly sorry for the kids that are living in poverty, because they don't have to live in poverty. Bob Hawke, they criticise him, but he was badly advised that money should have been given out as food coupons, and some of the lazy bloody departments he's got should have been made work to see the kids got the food. Like they did in the Depression. You never got money. You got 4 and 8pence a week in a food coupon.
Understood. Thanks, Arthur. I will take another couple of calls, but thank you very much. You make a really good point. Sandra, you say you've been on a sole parent with 3 teens, and you're moving on to New Start in January, and you're going to have to be fully tested for that, I think.
I've been very nervous listening to the radio the last few days, and it keeps being brought back to me that my benefits will reduce by $50 to $100 in January per week, and my rental is $350 a week. My food for 3 teenagers, you can imagine, and I can get about $500 a week. And there's no room to move. I'll have to look at. There's nowhere cheaper. I mean, you try and get cheaper rent. I've been on the community housing or the public housing list for over 10 years. Never been able to get in anywhere.
That's a disgrace, isn't it? I mean, you'd think within 10 years you would make it to the top of some list.
I constantly update and keep in contact with the housing authority, and there's just nothing. They say you basically have to be camping in the middle of the road to be homeless, to get into transitional housing, and then perhaps get into a public housing unit. And for people to say we're lazy or we're undeserving is so unfair. My kids are all 2 of them are suffering from depression. I have to look after them, take them to like Headspace and all that. I'm studying full time at the moment as well. These reductions that they've put into TAFE and the forecast reductions are, making me into a nervous wreck, actually.
I'm not surprised.
And I do apply for work all the time. I applied for part-time work last week. I spent 2 days going out to West Tona, the charming area of Altona, and I didn't get the job. It was only a 15-hour-a-week job, but it would have helped us get our heads above water. But there were, 10 people going for the same little puny job, reloading a lunch truck, People are desperate for these jobs. They fight for them because they're rare as hen's teeth, and it's not easy.
And obviously with 3 kids, you really have to, have, flexibility to be able to deal with them as well.
Yeah, I've got, there's 4 of us who need to go on buses. That's $4 a day each. That's $16 a day times 4. It adds up. It's, $350 a week. You do the math, and I do the automatic debits. I do $30 a week in gas, $30 a week electricity. It all comes out, and there's never enough. There's never enough.
Sandra, is there public transport in your area, or is it?
I'm extremely well serviced where I live. I live in Newport, which is sort of inner west.
Yes.
I couldn't live anywhere else. I couldn't afford to run a car. I don't drive a car. I don't know how people who are on benefits can afford to run a car, quite frankly.
Yeah. And you're very nervous about the next 6 months because of the reduction. If
I can't get a job after all the training I've done at TAFE, we're going to be even worse off. It's just going to be, it's quite frightening, like I say. And for people to put us down and think that we're lazy and things, it's completely unfair, because I work very hard to do what I'm doing and look after my children, and I've got the veg patch going where I can, and I cook every day. I don't buy takeaway every day. We don't see Maccas around here. We don't live a high life. We stay home. We don't go to the pictures. We don't go anywhere. And the kids are separated. We don't. Some days I don't send my child to school because I don't have the bus fare, or he doesn't have lunch. Just stay home today. It's cheaper to stay home. And it does separate them from the kids who have two parents to look after them.
And I mean, it's really important that they do get an education, Sandra. As you know, it is going to be their future.
Absolutely vital. And see where they've missed out, and this is going to disadvantage them for the rest of their lives. The way this disadvantage is, it's weighing them down. I can see it, and I feel quite helpless. I do as much as I can, but I feel quite helpless watching them become depressed about the position they're in and their inability to socially interact properly because they're not as wealthy as their mates. Yeah.
Well, Sandra, people who make decisions may be listening as you speak, so I'm hoping that they hear your story. Thank you very much. Xavier, you wanted to talk about the real economy versus artificial poverty.
Yeah, I've been writing a book for the past 6 months on poverty, and there are a lot of different reasons why people would be poor and why they end up in financial trouble. One of the big problems is just basic financial illiteracy. People are not taught about money, how it works, what it is, what it represents, and what its relationship is to the real economy.
And particularly handling things like credit. Financial institutions are very keen to give you a credit card, but don't fully explain exactly the implications of loading it up.
Exactly, and one thing that I'd really like listeners to get is that banks and financial institutions rely on keeping you in debt to stay in business. So the more that they can convince you to stay in debt, the more reason they have to continue to create profits. But another big problem is, for example, that people don't understand that money isn't real. Money is just a symbolic representation of wealth. It has very little connection nowadays to anything real in the economy. The economy is actually real people who are capable of real work, who need real goods and services. Now, we've got a country that's incredibly wealthy, full of people who are capable and willing and able to work, who cannot find jobs purely, a lot of the time, because the government has and in collusion with banks and financial institutions, have strangled the money supply. So we end up with ridiculous situations where we have empty buildings and homeless people. We have people capable and willing to work, yet and a whole country worth of work that needs to be done. Now, in the 1930s, the United States, in the Depression, they created funding for government projects, etc., to basically kick-start a whole bunch of people into jobs, into projects, into necessary infrastructure that this country desperately needs in many cases. I mean, we could employ 1 million people tomorrow in ecological reclamation. And people say, well, where is this money going to come from? Where is this going to come from? Well, people, the fact is, governments can create money out of nothing, and they do it all the time. The fact is, though, that they're abusing that system in order to make a small amount of people very, very wealthy out of completely unreal money, and they're creating artificial wealth at the expense of incredible artificial poverty.
Xavier, unfortunately, I have to leave it there, but thank you very much for the points that you make. I'm sure people were listening to how you explained that, and you did it very well. I'd be interested to see what comes from your book. Poverty in Australia, unfortunately, it's not something that we can solve in an hour, but